An endless source of frustration for me is the fact that any discourse over Marxism and anarchism will always include a Marxist lobbing on authority by Friedrich Engels, Marx's closest political colleague, at anarchists like a monkey fleeing poop. Marxists read Engels' essay, directed at anti-authoritarian, anarchist, socialists, and simply assume that Engels handily refuted the latter. They never seem to check whether Engels had properly characterized the anarchist position. The unexamined assumption by our Marxists seems to be that Engels says anarchists say X, so anarchists must, in fact, say X. Engels makes a two-pronged argument. In premise and conclusion form, it is as follows. P. The anti-authoritarians oppose authority. P2. Authority is required both for a successful social revolution and for the running of a modern society. C. The anti-authoritarians are wrong to generally oppose authority. Engels is correct that anti-authoritarians oppose authority. Anarchists have always vocally opposed all forms of central power and hierarchy. Anarchists believe instead in free associated cooperation in which power is shared among the rank and file. It is the second premise that we will be taking issue with. The second premise has two prongs. We will refer to them as PR1, the proposition that social revolution requires authority, and PR2, the proposition that running a modern society requires authority. Engels and the anarchists shared the goal of a social revolution, a social upheaval that would destabilize the capitalist system in such a way that it could be replaced by a socialist society. Engels appeals to this agreement by arguing that this social revolution requires authority. Engels argues that a revolution is carried out by force. The subordinate classes use weapons in a physical fight against the dominant classes. Engels thus characterizes a social revolution as, quote, the act whereby one part of the population imposes its will upon the other part by means of rifles, bayonets, and cannon, unquote. This is significant to Engels because such use of force seems to Engels, quote, authoritarian means, if such there be at all, unquote. Engels surmises that since social revolution includes a forceful imposition of the will of the subordinate classes on the dominant classes, that the two in fact switch places. The new dominant class maintains its new rule over the now subordinate class by, quote, means of the terror that its arms inspire in the reactionists, unquote. Since the social revolution necessitates this forceful imposition, it is, quote, certainly the most authoritarian thing there is, unquote. So how can anti-authoritarians reply to this argument? Well, simply, this is just a bad inference. Engels has set up a dichotomy in which the use of force against the dominant classes and their forces necessarily entails the creation of a new form of domination where the formerly subordinate class comes to subordinate the formerly dominant class. This is just not the case. Engels would have known this if he took the time to comprehend his opponent's position. Proudhon, the first self-styled anarchist, indeed rejected a forceful insurrection, but those he influenced came to a different position than he did. They came to advocate an insurrectionary class struggle against the dominant classes. They simply advocated this class struggle as a general revolt against central authority, rather than a swapping of the dominant and subordinate roles between the proletariat and bourgeoisie. The anarchist historian Vadim Damier pointed this out in a reply to Marxist critiques of the Spanish anarchist movement. Quote, many researchers who belong to the Marxist tendency have attempted to lay all the blame for the defeat of the Spanish Revolution on the Anarcho-Syndicalist movement, maintaining that the governmental collaboration of leaders of the CNT and FAI was a consequence of anarchist ideology which rejects the taking of political power by the workers. However, such a viewpoint is untenable. Anarchist conceptions not only repudiate the creation of new, quote, proletarian political authorities, but also envisage the liquidation of the old, unquote. Thus, PR1, the proposition that social revolution requires authority, is false. We may now move on to considering PR2. Engels also proposes that the running of a modern society requires authority, whether we speak of the smooth operation of a passenger train or the organization of production. The management of social affairs requires discipline, expertise, and delegation. Engels considers whether such administration could be carried on without authority. Quote, let us take by way of example a cotton spinning mill. The cotton must pass through at least 6 successive operations before it is reduced to the state of thread, and these operations take place for the most part in different rooms. Furthermore, keeping the machines going requires an engineer to look after the steam engine, mechanics to make the current repairs, and many other laborers whose business it is to transfer the products from one room to another, and so forth. All these workers, men, women, and children, are obliged to begin and finish their work at the hours fixed by the authority of the steam, which cares nothing for individual autonomy. The workers must, therefore, first come to an understanding on the hours of work, and these hours, once they are fixed, must be observed by all, without any exception. Thereafter, particular questions arise in each room, and at every moment concerning the mode of production, distribution of material, etc., which must be settled by decision of a delegate placed at the head of each branch of labor, or, if possible, by a majority vote. The will of the single individual will always have to subordinate itself, which means that questions are settled in an authoritarian way. The automatic machinery of the big factory is much more despotic than the small capitalists who employ workers ever have been. At least with regard to the hours of work, one may write upon the portals of these factories, "Leave, ye that enter in, all autonomy behind." So, Engels contends, because basic functions of modern societies require subordination of individual autonomy, they are, quote-unquote, authoritarian, and thus authority cannot be dispensed with. Engels goes to another example, the rail. Quote, let us take another example, the railway. Here too the cooperation of an infinite number of individuals is absolutely necessary, and this cooperation must be practiced during precisely fixed hours so that no accidents may happen. Here too, the first condition of the job is a dominant will that settles all subordinate questions, whether this will is represented by a single delegate or a committee charged with the execution of the resolutions of the majority of persona interested. In either case, there is a very pronounced authority. Moreover, what would happen to the first train dispatched if the authority of the railway employees over the passengers were abolished? So, how may anarchists reply to this need for authority? Here semantics come into the question. There is one sense in which authority may simply mean delegation and expertise. Anarchists have never railed against authority in this sense. They have only ever concerned themselves with authority in a completely different sense, the concentration of power at the top. Anarchists simply advocate that this kind of authority be abolished and societal affairs be organized through freely associated rank and file sharing power equally. Expertise and delegation are respected on the simple condition that neither is used to amass the kind of power possessed by ruling classes. Here we will again cite Madame Damier explaining the anarchist-communist view of the division of labor. Quote, anarchism rejected not only capitalism, private property, and the state, but also the centralization of social life and the division and specialization of labor. Anarchist theoreticians did not object to professional associations and other groups based on common interests, but they considered that the free society of the future would be based on self-managed, autonomous, territorial communes joined together by federations. To industrial centralization, with its occupational hierarchy and specialization, and to factory tyranny with its strict division of labor and its cult of production and productivity, the anarchists counterposed a break with the logic of industrialism. The decentralization and breaking up into smaller units of industry, its reorientation towards local needs, the integration of industrial and agricultural, intellectual, and physical labor, and the maximum possible self-sufficiency of communes and regions, unquote. We have thus refuted PR2, the proposition that the running of society requires authority. All told, it seems very obvious that Engels' argument is just straw man and equivocation. He doesn't know what his adversaries were actually saying with the words they were using and just assumes that his conception of these words is the only conception possible. Apparently, anarchists actually pointed this out to him. His reply was simply, "These gentlemen think that when they have changed the names of things, they have changed the things themselves. This is how these profound thinkers mock at the world." So Engels essentially admits that he couldn't care less about the actual context the speakers he is criticizing are using when they make their arguments. This makes him a bad faith actor and certainly shows him to be of insufficient ability to accomplish the task of, quote, debunking anarchism or anti-authoritarianism. So please, Marxists, stop using this essay. It's wrong, and you are wrong. Get better material. If you like the video, you can go down to the description and see the links to my Patreon and PayPal. If you would like to support me, I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.